Hello and welcome to our Luke Bible class. We're glad that you're with us today for our study. We are in Luke chapter 22. We're going to start in verse 24. For those keeping up with this is the 20th class in this study. And we're going to be studying through verse 46. Before we get into our text today, I made mention of this our last class, and I mentioned it again also in the introductory paragraph to our study sheet for today. Incidentally, there is another study sheet. We've got 7 questions there, help you get your mind into the text as we get into it and study it today. But one way of thinking about what's going on with Jesus now, right at this particular time, and I've suggested the concentric circles, the larger circles, then successively smaller circles to get more focused. Jesus' ministry traveling throughout Galilee, Samaria, Perea, Judea, Jerusalem, preaching and teaching. So that's the large circle. That was very definitely the bulk of his ministry and his ministry. And then here at the end, Jesus comes to Jerusalem, knowing what's going to transpire here, and the circle gets closer. That is, we have these Jews that have traveled to Jerusalem for the upcoming feast of Passover, and so every day he's in the temple, and these folks are coming to hear him teach and preach, and he's doing that through this week. And then we get to the observance of the Passover itself, the eating of the Passover meal, and Jesus is eating this meal with his apostles, okay? So we've gone from his ministry, his public ministry, to this week in Jerusalem, and now in the upper room. And that's where he is right now. And we're going to get from the upper room into the garden itself. And so in the upper room, Jesus' attention is focused on this much smaller group, the 12, the apostles. And he is working to prepare them and get them ready for what is about to transpire. Although, how frustrating did it have to be for Jesus to be in this position of knowing that these men weren't understanding, and that's going to become evident even in our study here today. And the chances of their understanding were not great, and yet there were some things still that he had to say to them and to try to get them prepared and ready for what was coming. And then it's going to go from there to the garden. And we will go with Jesus to the Garden of Gethsemane in our study today, Luke's account of that. And at the garden, he leaves his disciples behind and he goes by himself into the garden. So that circle gets down to a focus of Jesus himself, getting himself ready for what is about to happen. So I don't know, that might not be of any value to you, but I thought about that as kind of a framework to think about as this week is progressing. So last week, we saw Jesus come to the upper room with his disciples, and here he begins to speak with them about many things. One thing we might ought to keep in mind is that there was a lot more said and done than you learn about from any one of the Gospels. As a matter of fact, it's John's Gospel where we get more information about all of about the things that Jesus said. There is the cover John's dealing with the upper room and Jesus interacting with his apostles there is much more extensively covered in John's Gospel than in Matthew, Mark, or Luke. So a lot of other things happen, but we're focused, of course, in our study on Luke's Gospel. And so what we have seen thus far as in his coming to the upper room and eating the Passover meal is this instituting of the Lord's Supper, which had to have been a curious thing to the apostles. Certainly they didn't understand fully what he was talking about. And then, as a matter of fact, as Luke records this, at the end of that is when he reveals that that one of their number is going to betray him. Again, there had to have been questions about, well, betray you how? In what way are you going to be betrayed? But, of course, the prominent question for them was, who was it that would do the betraying? So we move on from there then, starting in verse 24, where Luke tells us that at this meal in the upper room, a great dispute arose among them as to which of them was to be regarded as the greatest. And he said to them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and those in authority over them are called benefactors. But not so with you. Rather, let the greatest among you be among the younger, and the leader as one who serves. For who is the greater? One who reclines at the table or one who serves? Is it not the one who reclines at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. So this question came up among them. This discussion is going to continue on here just a little bit, but we're stopping there at verse 27 for now. This discussion comes up, a dispute, Luke calls it, among the apostles about who is the greatest. A couple of things here. I asked the question, the very first question on the study sheet, what prompted the disciples' discussion over who would be the greatest? Well, the fact is, Luke doesn't tell us. He just kind of throws that out there on us all of a sudden. So we don't know what at this meal this night would have prompted that discussion. When you start bringing in the other gospel accounts, we remember Jesus in John 13 getting up from the table and putting the towel around him in the basin of water, and he washes all of the apostles' feet. You can see maybe that in connection with that, maybe Jesus did that in response to this dispute that arose among them. We just don't know that for certain. But something else, though, that we do know is that this certainly wasn't the first time this question came up. It seems to have been a rather common point of discussion among the apostles, that they would talk about who is the greatest in the kingdom. In Luke's gospel, back in chapter 9, we have another incident where that does occur. And a second question here, how does Jesus' response to their discussion compare to his response to the same in Luke 9 in verse 46, 47, and 48, just 3 verses here where this argument arises among them. Before we get to that, this question, this persistent question among the apostles gives us some insight into their thinking and their motivation for following Jesus, for wanting to be a part of what he said he has come to initiate and bring into being, and that was the kingdom. Their personal ambition became very evident. They wanted the prominent place. They wanted the highest place, and they wanted to be considered the greatest. And maybe they felt like they were kind of getting in on the ground floor, and so they would have the advantage over others to be able to come and to be a part of that kingdom and to have places of importance. Now, on the previous occasion, in Luke 9, Jesus takes a child and puts the child among them and talks about receiving this child. And what a powerful object lesson there. Here's a child that can do nothing for you. You gain no personal advantage by your relationship with this child, and yet Jesus says greatness in the kingdom is determined, though, by your willingness to receive a child, to be able to reach out to and to serve and minister to and to embrace those who can give you no personal advantage. A little bit different approach here when Jesus calls their attention to the way the Gentiles, the kings of the Gentiles, act. And so you think about these individuals and how they are in positions of great authority and great power, and how they exercise their lordship over other people. And Jesus said, your thinking is more in line with the way they are acting. And he goes on to say, and they are called benefactors. They like to be called ones who are assisting and helping other people, when the reality and the truth is that no, they're oftentimes very cruel. I mean, there are historical records of tyrants being given this very title of benefactor when that was not what they really were. And Jesus says, what you really are in the kingdom. And if you're going to have a place in my kingdom, you cannot follow the path of these individuals, these kings of the Gentiles, even though they are the epitome of your thinking. They are the very kind of thing that in your mind you're aspiring to. And Jesus says it cannot be that way among you. He said, let the greatest become as the youngest, and the leader as one who serves. You take any situation at a table, and they were reclined at a table. Who is the greater? The one who's reclined at the table or the one who is serving those who are reclined at the table? Well, it's the one who is being served at the table. That's the one that's considered in that setting to be greatest. And yet Jesus says, in my kingdom, it's just the opposite of that. It is the one who serves. And then he makes this statement, I am among you as one who serves. That, I don't know if the impact of that hit the apostles on this occasion like it could have or should have. We do know that in promising the Holy Spirit to these men, and we read about this again in John's account of Jesus and what he promised and said to the apostles in this upper room, that the Holy Spirit, among other things, would help bring to their remembrance the things that Jesus said. If they didn't, my point is, if they didn't get it now, they would get it. And by the help of the Holy Spirit, they would remember the words of Jesus, and it would impact them greatly at some point in time, whether it was now or not. But nevertheless, they're arguing about who is the greatest. Jesus' willingness to deal with these men, his willingness to speak to them consistently and persistently, even when they were not understanding, they were not getting what Jesus was saying, and yet he continued with them. He continued with them. I think there's a great lesson in that for us if we tend to lose patience with those whom we are trying to help guide and teach and instruct. And sometimes we are in that position, and people, many times, they just don't get it. And so, I mean, are we going to be willing to exercise the patience and the care with them that Jesus exercised with his own? But let's keep moving on here, trying to keep track of my time. Beginning in verse 28, you are those who have stayed with me in my trials. And I assign to you, as my Father assigned to me, a kingdom, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Perhaps it is that Jesus thought when they heard his words, and it was so radically different about the one who serves and the one who is being served, and tying that in with the kingdom, that they may have thought, well, then what's the point here? I mean, that's a huge disconnect for how they have always thought, and then what they're hearing from the mouth of Jesus on this occasion. And so I see this as kind of an encouragement to these apostles. Yes, you do have a place in my kingdom, and to recline at my table in the kingdom. And so, I think that is simply an encouragement by Jesus to these men, not to lose heart about the things that I'm saying to you. You still are my 12. They're the ones that I have chosen, and there is a place for you in what is about to come. But then he makes this statement at the end, and I ask this question, number 3 on the study sheet. You will sit at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Wow, what's that all about? You will sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. I think this is Jesus' way of letting these men know that what he has in mind for them and the role that he has in mind for them is going to be one of tremendous importance. And so he is expressing it to them in terms that they could relate to, not that they would fully understand or comprehend it, but they could relate to this. Obviously, it's not a literal thing. Jesus didn't come that that type of a situation would be physically and literally carried out. But instead, I think he is letting them know, you are going to have a key role to play, and it's going to be a role of leadership, of critical leadership in the kingdom that I am bringing. It reminded me of the words of Paul in Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 20, where it talks about the church being built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, with Jesus Christ being the cornerstone, the chief cornerstone. But that they are foundational to this kingdom. And I think what he says here to the apostles is parallel to what Paul is telling us about the nature of the church and the kingdom there in Ephesians. Okay, we continue with this evening. Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you that he might sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail, and when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. And Peter said to him, Lord, I am ready to go with you both to prison and to death. And Jesus said, I tell you, Peter, the rooster will not crow this day until you deny me 3 times, until you deny 3 times that you know me. This is a very impactful scene at the supper. But something, let's begin first of all, Jesus addressing Simon. Simon, Simon. The repeating of the name, that carries some weight with it in drawing attention to it, and kind of the emotion and the feeling that's behind it. You think about Jesus praying over the city of Jerusalem, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. Or when he's in the home of Mary and Martha, and Martha is complaining that Mary is not helping her prepare, and he addresses her, Martha, Martha. Here, Simon, Simon. It is a depth of emotion. It is an emotional connection and attachment that would have gotten Peter's attention. But we've got to be careful here about something, and this is one of the places where our English language kind of fails us a little bit. Behold, Satan demanded to have you that he might sift you like wheat. When we say the word you, a pronoun, it can be used in one of 2 ways. One could refer to you as an individual, but you could refer to a group of people and say you, referring to the group. We've kind of taken care of that ambiguity, that fuzziness there by creating some other language like y'all, to you all. And if we want to go that route, then Jesus says, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has demanded to have y'all. He wasn't speaking, the word that's used here, he was not speaking specifically to Peter individually, but he was speaking to the group. So I think we need to have that clear in our minds. And you may be reading from a translation or studying from a translation that even helps with that wording or gives you some kind of an explanatory note or something there. But nevertheless, what I want you to notice is Satan demanded to have you that he might sift you like wheat. Satan, it makes us think about Job and how Job wanted to have dealings, or rather Satan wanted to have dealings with Job, and God allowed that to happen under certain stipulations. That first of all, the first time he said you can't touch him physically. The second time he said you can touch him physically, you just can't take his life. So we get a little peek into the inner workings of this in the spiritual realm between the Lord and Satan demands to have you that he might sift you like wheat. And we know that these men are going to be going through some very, very trying, difficult times in the hours and days, and then even into the years to come. And Jesus lays that at the feet of Satan. And Satan's at work. He's very much at work. And he is all about attacking people. And he is all about working his best to destroy. And he very much had his sights on not only Jesus, but also his apostles. And Jesus says, I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. I asked the question here, number 4, did Jesus' prayer fail? He prayed that your faith may not fail. Well, what Jesus is getting ready to say, Peter, you're going to deny me. And these apostles would turn and run and hide when Jesus is arrested. And so we might, did Jesus' prayer fail? Did their faith fail them? Was what Jesus prayed for, did that not actually happen? I think we should look at that maybe in a couple of ways. And one is the fact that, with the exception of Judas, whom Jesus has already identified, now the name's not given, but remember he said there's one among you who will betray me. Jesus has already acknowledged that that's going to happen. But with these others, even though they are fearful and they go into hiding, and as Jesus is going to say here very specifically, Peter, you will deny me. You will deny me 3 times. Did their faith fail? Well, it depends on what you mean by fail. If Judas had faith, his faith did fail him. Sometimes we get knocked down. Sometimes we go through experiences and encounter things that they just throw us for a loop, spiritually even. And how we respond to them and what we do in those circumstances sometimes is far from ideal. As a matter of fact, it may not be good. But you notice what Jesus said, and when you have returned, strengthen your brothers. Is Jesus here suggesting and recognizing the fact that though they're going to go through this and there's going to be, to some level, a turning away or a falling away, that they will return. And so if that's happening, then ultimately speaking, their faith has not failed. Maybe their faith failed in the moment, but it did not continue to fail. And so Peter speaks up. Now remember, he addresses Simon, but says, your faith, you all, Satan has demanded to sift you like wheat. And then Peter feels compelled to respond. Now, he may have felt compelled to respond whether Jesus had called him by name or not. But, Lord, I'm ready to go with you both to prison and to death. And Jesus said, I tell you, Peter, the rooster will not crow this day until you've denied me 3 times. You have denied that you know me. Peter was one who was rather bold and sometimes rash in his statements. Sometimes he was willing to do things before others were willing to do them. Remember, he's the one who wanted to get out of the boat and walk to Jesus on the water, and he did so for a little while, and then it didn't turn out so well. But Peter speaks up and pronounces his devotion to Jesus, ultimate devotion. But Jesus knows that's not going to be the case, that he will deny that he knows him, not once, twice, but 3 times. And so Jesus knows that about Peter, and he warns him that it's about to happen. I think we can understand why Peter would have responded in the way he did. I don't remember what question no, it wasn't here. I wrote it down in my notes here. What about these circumstances prompted Peter to make such a bold statement? Well, he was among his peers. He was in the very face of Jesus. It was a situation in which there was no negatives. There was no opposition. And so in that circumstance, it's easy to be bold and strong when you're among supporters and in a supportive situation. But when you're not, and Peter's going to be in a situation where he's not within a few hours, And in that situation, the boldness is gone, and other emotions take over. And so we too can find ourselves in a situation like in church, in a Bible class, where yes, we are very supported and we're encouraged and we're strengthened and we're among friends and fellow believers and our faith is great. But get out of that situation and that circumstance and it might be a very different thing. So I say that to say it is probably the regret of Peter's life about what happens when he denies Jesus. And it's easy for us to be critical of Peter. You know, Peter didn't do the right thing. He shouldn't have done what he did. He shouldn't have been so bold and brash, but Peter's not all that different from us. Let's remember that as well. And so verse 35, and he said to them, when I sent you out with no money, knapsack, or sandals, did you lack anything? And they said nothing. And he said, but now, let the one who has a money bag take it, and likewise a knapsack, and let the one who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one. Jesus had sent these men out more than once on their preaching tours, and he told them, don't take anything with you, that you'll be provided for and supported with your needs by those to whom you are going. And so they did that, and that was exactly the case. And so he asked them to remember that situation. And he says, but now, it's going to be different now because you are going to need to take care in providing for the needs that you might have. Take a knapsack with you. Take a money bag. You're going to need to be supported, and you're not always going to be able to rely on the people around you. As a matter of fact, he is going to tell them, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak, which a cloak, that's not a spare piece of clothing. That was an essential piece of clothing. And we need to understand that. And he said, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and get a sword, because it's going to be something that is going to be needful for you. Now, why would Jesus say that? Let's continue on. For I tell you that the scripture must be fulfilled in me, and he was numbered with the transgressors. Your master is going to be counted as a criminal, and he's going to be treated as a criminal, and he's going to be looked upon as the criminals are looked upon. He is bad news. He's not just looked down on. He's looked down upon severely and sorely. And that's going to become evident in the way Jesus eventually is executed and how he is treated there. And that's a very important element of all of this. But he's telling them, I'm going to be treated, not as a hero. I'm going to be treated as a transgressor, a rule breaker, a law breaker, one who is worthy of death. And if that's going to be true of your master, then as you go out representing me in the future, you're going to be treated the same way. And so there may come times in which you need a sword. You need to be able to defend yourself. I think about Paul when he talks about his hardships and trials and persecutions and all of those things in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. He mentions there that you run into all kinds of trials and challenges, and he mentions robbers. There were times, it's never recorded for us in Acts, and there's no other mention of it, I don't believe, in any of the epistles, but there were times when they encountered people who were trying to rob them. And Jesus, I think, is telling his apostles, there will come times and situations in which you're going to need to defend yourself. Jesus is not teaching in any way violence. He is not teaching in any way the promulgation, the promotion of the gospel and the kingdom by means of violence. He is not promoting in any way killing in the name of Jesus Christ. That is not here at all. But I do believe that Jesus is warning them that it's going to be hard. It's going to be so difficult and so challenging at times that you will encounter situations in which having a sword will be a good thing for you. And they said, look, Lord, here are 2 swords. And he said, it's enough. So then, beginning in verse 39, Jesus goes with them, and it says, as was his custom, they go to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. And when he came to the place, now Matthew does not identify the place. We know from the other gospel accounts that the place is an olive grove that was on the side of the Mount of Olives that faced Jerusalem across the Kidron Valley. And this was the place to which they went. Luke doesn't tell us that, but we do know that to be the case. And it says it was his custom to come to this place. And that's very interesting to me, in that this wasn't just a happenstance. Well, this looks like a good place. Let's go here. They were very deliberately going to this location because they had been there before. They had been there enough times that it was a customary place for Jesus to go to, which tells us then that the owner of this place was one who agreed for and allowed for Jesus to have use of this garden, the olive press, at any time he needed it. It makes me think about not only the owner of this garden, it makes me think about the owner of the house that opened it up to Jesus to use the upper room for the Last Supper. It makes me think about the owner of the donkey and its foal that Jesus was able to get when he needed it and to use. And it's interesting that we don't know the names of any of these people. And that in itself, I think, is somewhat of a message that we can serve the Lord effectively and efficiently and well in a nameless way. There doesn't have to be the attention. There doesn't have to be the recognition. So they went to this place. And he says to them, pray that you may not enter into temptation. You know, some things are getting ready to happen. And pray that you respond well in all of this. And so he withdrew himself about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and prayed, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. And his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And so you do get a hint that Jesus, this wasn't just a little short prayer, that, you know, we get the gist of the prayer, and then he prays even more earnestly. So this is an extended time of prayer. We learn from the other Gospels about 3 times Jesus goes in to pray this prayer. And there are a lot of those kinds of details that Luke doesn't tell us, but he does tell us some things here that give us some insight into just how weighty this whole experience is for Jesus right now. The fact that an angel comes to strengthen him. Well, why was it necessary for an angel to come and strengthen Jesus? That tells us, I think, the depth of the emotional turmoil and agony and struggle that Jesus is undergoing here. I'm convinced, and I don't want to make this true of anybody but myself, but I am convinced that I have not really appreciated the depth of what's happening here in the garden as Jesus is praying. It is worthy of note that when we read about the crucifixion account, and we oftentimes talk about how painful the crucifixion was, and it was. But it's interesting that in the presentation of that to us in the Gospels don't really tell us, they don't tell us and describe Jesus' agony and his pain. He mentions that he's thirsty one time, which you wouldn't think that would have been the only thing that's mentioned about the discomfort, major understatement, that Jesus is undergoing. But when you look at the Garden of Gethsemane, it tells us agony. He is in agony. So much so that there's this physiological happening with him where his sweat becomes like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And apparently there is a physiological phenomenon that happens where the capillaries, the small blood vessels near the surface of the skin, under extreme duress will break, and sweat or blood will come out like sweat. It has been said that the real battle between Satan and Jesus was fought in the garden, not on the cross. And I think there is a great deal of truth in that. This is where the struggle was. Lord, Father, if you're willing, remove this cup from me. I mean, here we are. Jesus knows what's coming. He's told his apostles what we're coming. Sometimes when we know something is on the horizon, it's not up until we get right down to it that the real fight happens. And Jesus agonized so much that the Lord sent an angel there to be with him. And he's sweating blood. Just think on that for a moment about what Jesus recognized was going to happen to him. And as he prayed, we know that Jesus wanted more than almost anything to not have to go through this. There was only one thing that he wanted more than not to have to go through this, and that one thing was to do the Father's will. And since it was the Father's will, he went through with it. And so he rose from his prayer and he came to the disciples and found them sleeping for sorrow. That's an interesting phrase, sleeping for sorrow. They know something's up. They do know something's up, and they're sorrowful about what's going on around them and the way Jesus is acting and the thing Jesus is saying, but they're asleep. And he asked them, "Why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you might not enter into temptation." So the second time in Luke's account of this that he tells them to pray that prayer that you not enter into temptation. So here we go. It's all getting ready to break loose. And so we leave Jesus in the garden. Think on that and remember Jesus there and what he is doing and what he has done, and just how great his love for us had to be. We'll continue our study next time, beginning in verse 47 here in Luke 22, and I would encourage you to at least go through the end of the chapter, which would take you through verse 71. Again, I don't remember if that's exactly how far that goes. What I have planned goes. I forgot to look at that before I sat down here to start our study today. But nevertheless, we'll look forward to our next opportunity to get into Luke's gospel and continue to look at this most climactic, important series of events upon which our entire faith is built. No small thing. We'll see you then.